Question 1. Text 1 contains no details about the personal experience of homeless people. Give 2 reasons why you think that this is the case. Okay, so this is a 2-mark question asking about detail and why do we have some texts that have more detail and some texts that have less detail. Now for a detail question, we need to think about the type of reader that would be thinking about reading that text. And it's also helpful to think about the purpose of that text. Now both of these things are going to influence the amount of detail that we would have in a text. So if we have a look at this text on the right hand side here, we can see that it says right at the top that this text is an information sheet. And we also get told from the heading that it's going to give us facts about homelessness. So straight away, this text definitely seems to be trying to inform the reader, and often informative texts will contain lots of detail. However, this question is saying that it contains no details about the personal experience of homeless people. And the key here is this phrase, personal experience. So the details about a personal experience of a homeless person might involve an interview with a specific homeless person, individual stories, and why some people have ended up on the streets. But just having a quick skim of this text tells us that we don't have any of that here. So we've just got very general facts about homelessness. So here, the purpose of the text is not to tell us about any personal experiences of homelessness. It's to tell us about the general issue of homelessness and to tell us facts about homelessness. So they want to tell us about the general causes of homelessness, generally what is being done in local communities, and what might be done in the future or what's going to happen in the future for homeless people. So if we have a look in our written solution, we've got that text 1 contains no details about the personal experience of homeless people because it is an information sheet, meaning only facts are presented. So that's one reason. We don't have any personal anecdotes or experiences or stories because it's a factual sheet designed to inform the reader generally about homelessness. And we can see that the student has put that for their second reason. So they've said the main point of the text is to inform the reader generally about the issue of homelessness, so personal cases are not discussed. So they've given 2 really well explained reasons there. Remember to read that question. We've got 2 marks and we need to give 2 reasons. So they've done that really well. So when we're thinking about detail, think about what's the text trying to do? What's it trying to inform the reader on if it's an informative text? And how might that influence whether we've got a lot of detail on something or not much detail on something? Question 2. What is meant by affordable housing in text 1? So this is a definition question. So if a question asks you what the meaning of something is, what is meant by a phrase, or what the definition of a phrase is, they want you to use the text to work out what the author means in that context. So what you shouldn't be doing here is going straight to your dictionary and looking at what these words mean, because we want to look in the text first to work out the context. Now with definition questions or meaning of questions, the first thing you need to do is check whether we have a glossary in the text. And that's because if there is a glossary, what they will want you to do is copy out the exact phrasing from the glossary that they've given you. Now we don't actually have a glossary here on the text, so we can rule out that option. If we don't have a glossary, the next thing we need to do is look in the text to find the word or the phrase. So here it's affordable housing, and we can see if we scan through quickly that that is first mentioned here, affordable housing. Now, as we don't have a glossary, the next thing we need to look for is any mention of a footnote. And this will be indicated by sometimes a little star or a little 1 or a little 2. And we can see that we've got that here. We've got a little 1. And if you ever see something like this in the text, it means that it's a reference to a footnote. Now the footnote comes at the foot of the text, the bottom of the text. So we need to look for that little one at the bottom of the text, which we can see is here. So it says affordable housing refers to housing that is affordable by that section of society whose income is below the average household income. So the answer for this question would be exactly what it says in the footnote. So affordable housing means that housing can be afforded by people earning a low income. You'd also be correct if you put below the average household income. Question 3. What is the purpose of text 1? Give a reason to explain how you know this. Okay, so this is a 2-mark purpose question. So the purpose of a text refers to why the author has written it. What were they trying to do when they wrote the text? So if we look at this text here, our first clue is that we've got this phrase information sheet up here. So we know that it's a sheet to give facts, and also the heading tells us that, facts about homelessness. If we quickly skim through the text, we can see that the subheadings say what is homelessness causes, what is being done, and the future. So giving us the different aspects of homelessness, and then within each paragraph under each subheading, they're giving us facts about that aspect of homelessness. So this text is definitely to inform or explain about homelessness and what causes it, what's being done. So that would be our first mark, explaining what the purpose is. Then for our second mark, we need to give a reason to explain how we know this. So in other words, work backwards. Tell the examiner how you worked out the purpose. So here we could say the heading tells us that it's to give us facts about homelessness. It tells us that it's an information sheet, and also within each paragraph we've got lots of facts about various aspects of homelessness. So if we have a look at this model answer, we've got the purpose of text 1 is to inform the reader about the state of homelessness and its causes. So there's a good summary there of what the author is trying to inform the reader about. It's not enough to just say it's to inform. So that's our first mark. And then we've got this is clear in the text as it is an information sheet with subheadings detailing various parts of the whole issue. So we've actually got 2 reasons there. It would be enough to just say it's an information sheet, but try and explain that to the examiner that you know what an information sheet means. So something like the text is an information sheet, meaning that it's just trying to give the reader informational facts about homelessness. So with questions like this, make sure that you answer the full question. If the question is asking you to give a reason or to explain how you know this, you just need to tell the examiner how you worked that out from the text, or which part of the text gave you the answer. Question 4. Identify 2 organisational features used by the author of text 2. Give an example of information which each of these features helps you to find. Okay, so this is a 4-mark question on organisational features. And this structure for an organisational features question is very common in your Open Awards Functional Skills Level 2 exam. So an organisational feature just means a visual feature which helps organise the text or that helps the reader navigate the text. So we've got various organisational features on here. We've got a heading, summarises what the text is going to be about. We've also got a strapline underneath that. It's kind of an extended heading. It gives a little bit more information on the main heading. We've also got an image here. Be careful not to say photo for that because it's not, it's a drawing. We can say image or graphic. We've also got a caption underneath that telling us what it is. And we've also got a footnote down here as well. So you can pick any 2 of those organisational features for your first 2 marks. And then for our next 2 marks, we need to give an example of information for each of those features that we've chosen. So when the question asks you for an example of information, they're wanting you to pull directly from the text. So if we take the heading, for example, well, we can use our knowledge of organisational features to know that the heading summarises what the text is going to be about, and the heading here tells us life on the streets. So if we put those two things together, the example of information it gives us is that the heading tells us that the whole text is going to be about life on the streets. So if we have a look at our written solution here, we've got one organisational feature used by the author of text 2 is a heading. That's our first mark. An example of information that this helps us to find is that the text is going to be about life on the streets. That's our second mark. Another organisational feature used in text 2 is a caption. This comes underneath the image and tells us that the drawing is of Trevor, a homeless person. So for this question, they're not asking you about the function of the organisational features. They're wanting you to use the organisational feature to pull information from the text. So what information does that organisational feature tell you? Question 5. Identify how the writer of text 2 feels when he leaves in the morning. Explain how you know this. Okay, so this question is worth 2 marks. And it's about identifying relevant information from the text. So the first thing we need to identify is how the writer feels when he leaves in the morning. So this phrase "in the morning" is very important. We want to look in the text and see where he's leaving in the morning so we can see the correct section of text to start with. So I would be scanning through the text and looking for the phrase "morning" or "in the morning." And we can see that it comes up here. So it says in the early hours of the morning it started to rain. And it also comes up here in the morning at the end of the text. So if we go back to the question, we can see that it's asking us about when he leaves. So the whole text is about him spending a night on the streets. So when he leaves after the night in the streets is likely to be at the end of the text. So if we read this section, we can see in the morning I ditched my cardboard box in the nearest bin and went home. So this is definitely the part where he's leaving. He says he's painfully aware that what I had experienced was far from the suffering of people who have no place to go but the streets. Okay, so this is the section of text that we're interested in for this question. So we need to identify how he feels. So this is a little bit more implicit, more unclear meaning. So the writer says he's painfully aware that what he had experienced was far from the suffering of people who have no place to go but the streets. So what he's saying is that he really recognises that his night on the streets was nothing compared to what these people have to do every day. So from that, the implicit meaning, or what he's kind of suggesting that he feels like, is that he feels sorry for the homeless people, or he feels bad for them. So to answer this question, we kind of have to work out the meaning first, and then for the explain how you know this part of the answer, we need to tell the examiner which section of text we work that out from. So we can see here that the student has put in the morning when he leaves, the writer feels sorry for the homeless people. We could also say he feels sympathy, he feels sad for them, anything like that. And we know this because he says he was painfully aware that he doesn't have the experience of having nowhere else to go. So he's painfully aware of the difference in his life with the homeless people's lives. So for this question, he never actually says how he feels in the form of an emotion, but we need to read between the lines and work out the meaning based on what he does say. Question 6. What is meant by camaraderie as used by Trevor in text 2? Give a reason why you think rough sleepers have no camaraderie. Okay, so this is a definition question with a little bit added on the end. So let's deal with the first mark first, which is the meaning of the word camaraderie. So remember, with definition questions, the first thing we should do is look for a glossary, which we don't have here. The second thing we should do is look for the word in the text and see if we've got a footnote. And we can see that we do have the word camaraderie here, and we've got a little star next to it, or an asterisk. And that usually indicates we've got a footnote. So if we have a look down here, we can see the star again, and that says mutual trust and friendship between people sharing the same experience. So that would be the answer to the first part of this question, what is meant by the word camaraderie. So we would just copy that footnote out. The second part of this question asks us to give a reason why we think rough sleepers have no camaraderie. So we can see in this paragraph it says there's no camaraderie on the streets. So if we look prior to that, it says, however, the night was mild, and as I learned later from a fellow sleeper, Trevor, rough sleepers are threatened by much worse in the night: thugs, rats, dogs, physical and verbal abuse, and theft from other rough sleepers. Okay, so if we know the word camaraderie means mutual trust and friendship between people sharing the same experience, and we know that rough sleepers don't have that, a reason why they wouldn't have that is because they're stealing from each other, they're physically assaulting each other, and they're verbally assaulting each other as well. So any of those reasons would be suitable here. So if we have a look at our written solution, we've got camaraderie means mutual trust and friendship between people sharing the same experience, which we've got from the footnote. The rough sleepers have no camaraderie as they steal from one another. So that would be a correct reason and the correct definition. The reason it is not relevant to put thugs, rats and dogs is because they're not people sharing the same experience. So that's not relevant to the question about camaraderie. It's only to do with the bad things that the rough sleepers are doing to each other that affects the lack of camaraderie. Question 7. In the fourth paragraph, the writer uses a rhetorical question. Give 2 effects that this has on the reader. Okay, so this is a language features question asking us about the effect of rhetorical questions. Now, we need to obviously know what a rhetorical question is and what the usual effect is, but we also need to apply it to this context here. It's not enough to just give a generic effect of a rhetorical question. We need to see what effect it's giving in this text. So a rhetorical question is a question that doesn't need or expect an answer. So the author is using it for a different purpose or an effect on the reader. So if we have a look in the text itself, we can see that the rhetorical question is here. It's quite a long one. So it says, above all, how can government possibly expect councils to budget for this and still maintain public services when their budgets have been cut year after year? Okay, so we should know from our revision that rhetorical questions usually invite the reader to think more deeply about whatever the writer is saying, the topic or the point that they're making. So here, the point that they're making is that it's ridiculous that the government expect the council to maintain public services on such a low budget when it's being cut. So it encourages the reader to think more deeply about that problem that the council are facing. So that's one reason we could definitely put down. We also want to think about kind of the tone and how the rhetorical question is coming across. So it's definitely creating quite a frustrated tone, and it's expressing disbelief at the government's expectations of the council. And we can see that through words like possibly and also still, which is in bold as well, maintaining that exasperated, disbelieving tone. So that's another reason we could put down. It also highlights the fact that the writer believes that the government are to blame rather than the council. So they're putting the blame onto the government using this rhetorical question and taking it away from the council. So we can pick 2 of those reasons that we've said. Here the student has said the rhetorical question makes the reader think more deeply about the council's problem. That's our first reason, as well as emphasising the ridiculousness of the expectation placed upon them by the government. Question 8. What does the author mean when he talks about prioritising those with a local connection? Okay, so this is again a meaning question, but this time we need to explain the meaning of the whole phrase. So we first need to work out what prioritising means, and you can use a dictionary for this if you're not sure, but prioritising just means to put someone first. So then we've got this phrase, those with a local connection. So we can see that that is here in the text. So if we read that whole paragraph, it says, of course, many homeless people are referred to us by, for example, prisons or social services. However, these people can choose the area they wish to live in. This is impractical for the council. We have to prioritise those with a local connection. Okay, so what the author is saying here is that homeless people are able to choose the area that they wish to live in, which is not particularly realistic or helpful for the council because they have to put people first with a local connection. So we have to kind of work out what that phrase local connection means. So the phrase local means to do with that area, and the word connection means to have some sort of relationship with. So we can understand this whole phrase by something like we have to give preference or put people first who already live in the area or have some sort of relationship to the area. So they might have relatives in the area. So that's what we've got in our written solution here, those who have relatives in the area. But basically we're just explaining what a local connection means and how someone could have a local connection. Question 9. Edward Jennings in text 3 gives his views on homelessness and who is responsible. Give one fact and one opinion he uses to support his point of view. Okay, so this question has a little bit of context to it. So they're telling us what the text is about using this sentence here. Now, a common mistake students make with these type of questions is they read this first part of the question in a way that they think it's asking them to summarise the writer's views on homelessness and who is responsible. But that's just giving you some context as to what the text is going to be about. The actual question here is just the second sentence, so they're just asking us to pull one fact and one opinion from the text for 2 marks. So remember, a fact is something that can be proven. We could look it up and verify it and prove it to be true. An opinion is just what somebody thinks, so it can be disagreed with or agreed with, and it can't be proven to be true. It's neither true or false. So let's have a look in the text then. So in this second paragraph we've got some facts. So in the town centre some 50 people sleep rough every night. That is a figure, it's something that's been researched and we could verify it. In the next sentence we've got the council is aware that the number of hidden homeless is also increasing, though the statistics are unknown. So that is also a fact, the number of hidden homeless is increasing, but they don't know the statistics. So it's something that's verifiable that they don't know the statistics. We could prove that to be true. We've got another fact here, the council has for a long time had a duty of care for those in priority need. However, within that same paragraph, that same sentence, we've got an opinion. So, whose plight is often pitiful. This is an opinion. It's not something that we can prove to be true. It's based on someone's thoughts or feelings. That word pitiful is linked to an emotion, so we can't prove that to be true. Then in the next sentence, we've got the Homelessness Reduction Act 2017 now requires us to do more to prevent homelessness. Again, that's based on legislation, based on a law, so it is definitely a fact. Next is an opinion. It is unclear how. So again, that's his thoughts or feelings on the matter. He doesn't feel that it's clear. In the next sentence, we've got rough sleepers can be counted as people who frequently change their address. So again, this can be verified. It's something that they're able to do. They're able to count the rough sleepers. And then we've got an opinion here. Those threatened with homelessness are harder to identify. So that word harder is his opinion. It's not verifiable and we can't prove that it is harder. It's just his point of view. So that is one paragraph broken down for you. As we can see, we have got a lot more facts in that paragraph, but there are some opinions as well. Might be a good idea to practice on this text and see if you can spot any other facts and opinions in the rest of the paragraphs. But if we have a look at the written solution, we've got one fact he uses is some 50 people sleep rough every night. One opinion is it is unclear how. So we've got 1 mark for each of those, 1 mark for the fact and 1 mark for the opinion. Question 10. Compare the views of the writers of text 1 and 3 on homelessness and how these views are conveyed. Okay, so this is a comparison question that is very common in Open Awards Functional Skills Level 2 exams. And this is a 4-mark question. A big mistake students make with this question is only answering half of it. So they'll either only focus on the views or they'll only focus on how the views are conveyed. And if you do that, then you're guaranteeing that you can't get more than 2 marks for the question. So it's really important to answer the full question. So let's break down this question and think about where we're going to get our marks from. So the first thing to notice with this question is we've got the word compare. So this just means that we need to focus on similarities and differences. So tell the examiner whether the thing you're talking about in the text is a similarity or a difference with the other text. And we need to do that with 2 things. So the first thing, where our first 2 marks come from, is a detailed comparison of the views expressed in texts 1 and 3 on the topic of homelessness. So views is just another way of saying opinions and the points of view. So what are the opinions of the writers on homelessness and how are these similar or different? Remember, we could have some similarities across the 2 texts and we could have some differences as well. So make sure that you look for both, and if there are both, then write them down. So that is our first 2 marks there. And our next 2 marks come from the second part of the question. So how these views are conveyed. Now, a lot of students are not sure what that word conveyed means and it throws them off a little bit. Conveyed just means how are the views put across. So in other words, what methods do the writers use in order to put across their views? So this is anything from bias to language features to facts and opinions, and also the overall style. So is one text much more formal, is the other text more informal? So see if you can see any comparisons of similarities and differences across the 2 texts in how the views are conveyed as well. Okay, so here we've got both texts. So let's first think about the views. Now remember, we're looking for similarities and differences in what the authors say about the topic of homelessness. So the easiest way to start is to look at similarities. So have a scan through the text and see if you can see where both texts mention a similar idea. So we can see that both texts focus on local councils. So text 3's sole focus is talking about local councils and how they're expected to do too much. So they mention that the council has for a long time had a duty of care for those in priority need, whose plight is often pitiful. So the author there is adding their own opinion, suggesting that they do feel sorry for the homeless people. They then mention that the Homelessness Reduction Act now requires us to do more to prevent homelessness, so it requires the councils to do more. However, it's unclear how. In text 1, local councils are also mentioned as having a duty to care for those in priority need. They also mention local councils down here, so local councils are being asked to do more, though how this will be funded is unclear. So again, sharing text 3 sentiments that it's really unclear as to how councils are actually going to do more to help homeless people. Text 1's core view is that homelessness needs to be addressed urgently, and we can see that in the last line of the text, and they use all of these facts to sort of back that up throughout. Text 3 agrees that homelessness does need to be addressed, and they say that it's a national crisis, and throughout they use phrases like plight and pitiful to show that they do have sympathy for the homeless people. However, Text 3 argues that it needs to be funded by central government and not by councils, so they say that here, not by local rates, which is another way of saying local authority, local council. That's not mentioned in Text 1, however they do mention that it's unclear how the council are able to fund this. Okay, so now let's think about the way the views are conveyed. So remember, we're looking for similarities and differences in the methods the writers use across the two texts. So the first similarity that I notice here is that both texts definitely use facts to put across their views. So in Text 1, we've got lots of facts. I mean, it tells us straight away in the title that it's facts about homelessness. The most clear point of view that we've got from the author is that its causes need to be addressed urgently. So the causes of homelessness need to be addressed, and they use lots of facts to back up that point of view. So for example, local councils have a duty to help those in priority need. However, they have no duty towards those who are intentionally homeless. And they also say that local councils are being asked to do more, and that there are no actual statistics to show how many people are homeless in the UK. In Text 3, we've got similar facts. So they say that the council has had a duty of care for those in priority need for a long time. They talk about the Homelessness Reduction Act, which requires them to do more to prevent homelessness. That many homeless people are referred to as the council by prisons or social services. In Text 3, they're using those facts to back up their point of view that the council simply don't have the funding to deal with the homelessness problem, and it should be funded by the government, not by local rates, which we can see down there. So then if we think about differences, if we think about the style across the two texts, that is definitely quite different. So Text 1 uses a much more impersonal style, and we don't have any use of the first person to express the author's personal views. It's all very removed, the author's voice is removed, and they're focusing much more on just the facts about homelessness, the causes, what's being done, and so on. In Text 3, this is different. Text 3 is written in a much more personal style. The author's voice is really prominent throughout, and we have some strong personal opinions from them. So just to give you an example here, they say this is impractical for the council. We have to prioritise those with a local connection. So really personal there, especially that use of the word we, showing that the author's voice is really clear within the text. Okay, so here we can see the written solution then for this question. So we've got the views dealt with first. So the student has said in both texts, the authors mention how local councils are expected to intervene with homelessness. In Text 1, the author says that local councils have a duty to help those in priority need. Similarly, in Text 3, the author states that the council has for a long time had a duty of care for those in priority need, but the council are now required to do more to prevent homelessness. So the student there has picked out similar views across the texts and supported that with a quotation, and they've also used really good comparative language. So we've got in both texts here, and we've also got the word similarly there as well. Then they've moved on to talking about the way the views are conveyed. So they said in Text 1 this is conveyed using facts and statistics and an impersonal tone, as the author is presenting facts to inform the reader. So they've linked that to the purpose and why we've got facts and figures and an impersonal tone. Then they've said the author of Text 3 also uses facts. However, they also have use a lot of opinions to show their point of view on the issue of homelessness. For example, it is unclear how. So again, the student here has talked about similarities, so they've said that they both use facts. However, they've also looked at some differences, so thinking about the tone and the use of opinions in one text. Again, we've got some really good comparative language, so words like also and however show that we're looking at similarities and differences. Question 11. Which text is the least biased? Using all three texts, explain your selection. Okay, so this is a 4-mark bias question, and we're being asked which text is the least biased. So they might ask you which one's the most biased or which one's the least biased, so make sure that you read that question carefully. So that is our first mark, simply identifying the text that's the least biased. We then need to explain why that text is the least biased using information from that text. So pick out some quotes that show that it's not biased, or even some techniques that show that it's not biased. Then for the next 2 marks, we need to explain why the other 2 texts are slightly more biased. Again, using information and quotes from both of those texts. Remember, bias is a one-sided text. So that's the first thing you should be looking for when deciding if a text is biased or not. Is it one-sided, or does it show both sides of the argument? If it shows both sides of the argument, it's likely to be a not very biased text. If it shows one side of the argument, it is likely to be biased. We can also work out the purpose to help us work out whether a text is biased or not. So a persuasive text will always be biased, whereas a text that's strictly trying to inform the reader will be less likely to be biased. So it's all about the author's intent and purpose behind the text. You can also think about the author themselves. So do they have a reason for being biased, being one-sided, or are they likely to just present both sides of the argument? So if we first have a look at text 1, this text is a not very biased text. And that's because it's an information sheet giving facts about homelessness. So it's very focused on giving facts about homelessness, and it very occasionally gives points of view from the author. For example, at the end here we have got an opinion: the causes need to be addressed urgently, but the majority of the text is extremely factual. And these facts are not manipulated in any way to manipulate the reader to feel a certain way about homelessness. They're just simply to inform the reader about the causes of homelessness, what it is, what's being done, and what the future holds as well. So this text definitely looks like a very unbiased text, so it's a strong contender for our least biased text. In terms of text 2, we know that this is written from a very personal experience of one person. So journalist Ed Baker spent a night on the streets to see what life means for rough sleepers. So he personally has spent a life on the streets and written about it. So we've got lots of strong personal opinions in here. For example, painfully aware that what I had experienced was far from the suffering of people who had no place to go but the streets. So the author here is very clearly against homelessness and feels sorry for the rough sleepers that he's come across. So this is quite a biased text because we've got strong personal opinions, and it's only based on one person's experience as well. We've got lots of his thoughts and feelings in here. Then finally, let's look at text 3. So although this text is very formal and it does contain a lot of facts, for example, in the town centre some 50 people sleep rough every night, this is still quite a biased text, and that's because it's very one-sided. And it's very much on the side of the council. So the local town councillor here is writing to the MP because he needs him to address the desperate problem that the local council has with homelessness. So the author here is from the council, therefore he's very much on the side of the council. So he doesn't say anything negative about the council in relation to homelessness. He's only talking about the problems that they are facing, and saying that they have no budget for this because of what the government have done with their budget cuts. This text also has a persuasive purpose, so we know that persuasive text will always be biased. He's trying to persuade the MP to take action with his request here, so request his assistance in addressing the desperate problem that the local council has with homelessness, and at the end he says it should be funded by the government. So he's trying to persuade the MP to take action and make homelessness be a government issue rather than a local council issue. So this is definitely a very biased text, despite the fact that it does contain some facts. So here we have the written solution then for this question. So just to show you where they've got the marks from, let's read it. So they first identified which text is the least biased. So text 1 is the least biased text. That is our first mark there out of 4. Then they've explained why that is using information from that text. So this is because text 1 is an information sheet, meaning it is fact-based and gives facts about homelessness rather than points of view. So identifying there that we don't have any biased facts in there, and we have a lack of a point of view from the author for our explanation there. That's our second mark. Then the student has explained why text 2 and text 3 are more biased. So they've said text 2 is much more biased as it uses strong emotive language and a personal tone to put forward personal views and opinions about homelessness. So that is our explanation for our third mark for text 2. And then they've said finally text 3 is also biased as although it does include facts, it is written by a local politician who clearly disagrees with the government's stance. So is writing only from the council's perspective, so it's a one-sided text. Then they've also said text 3 is also trying to persuade the reader to take action on their request, therefore making it biased. So that is our fourth mark there. So make sure with this question that you do explain the bias or the levels of bias in all three texts, and make sure you're really clear when you're labelling which text you think is the least biased text. Question 12. Identify the styles of writing used in text 2 and text 3 and give one example from each text which suggests that style of writing. Okay, so this is another 4-mark question, but as long as you know how to answer this question, we don't actually need to write too much. So this is a style question. Now, the style of writing refers to the overall way a text is written. And there are 6 sort of main styles that you need to know for functional skills, which will fit into all texts that you will see. So these are personal, impersonal, informative, persuasive, informal and formal. Now if you're not sure what those mean or what style is, I'd recommend that you go back and look at your revision before watching the rest of this video. Now for this question we need to give one style that fits text 2 and one style that fits text 3. That is our first 2 marks. Then for our next 2 marks we need to give one example from each text. So an example from text 2 and an example from text 3, which matches with the style that we've picked for each text. The most common mistake for this question that students make is they're not confident with what examples they need to give for each style. So make sure you're really confident with what constitutes a formal style, what examples we can give for that, and what makes up an informative style and what examples we would give for that. So if we have a look at both our texts here, let's see if we can determine what the style is of both of them. So in text 2, we've got lots of personal pronouns in here, lots of use of the word I, also my, and this shows a personal style. So the author's point of view or opinion is really clear to us here, and we know exactly how he feels. So we could definitely say that this text is written in a personal style. We can definitely also say that this text is quite informal and chatty and conversational. So we've got lots of contractions in here. So I'd instead of I had. Also there's instead of there is. We've also got some idioms and casual phrasing, which also contributes to the informal style. For example, people with a roof over their heads. So that's quite a casual way of saying with people with somewhere to live. So the 2 that definitely are quite obvious and strong in text 2 are the styles informal and personal. So then if we look at text 3, straight away this is a much more formal text. It's a letter from a professional person to another professional person. So it's a very formal text, and we can see that straight away in the first line. It is with regret that I find myself obliged to write to you. So that would be a really good example to give any sort of formal phrasing that we wouldn't use in day-to-day life. Also the opposite in terms of contractions, so we've got words in their full form such as it is rather than it's. This text, although it's formal, is also still personal, the same as text 2. We've got lots of the use of the word I. For example, I urge you, I look forward to your reply. So the author's point of view here is really obvious to us. We're told what they think and that they're on the side of the council. It's also quite persuasive, this one as well. They are trying to get the MP to take action. So I urge you to raise this issue in Parliament. It's a national crisis and should be funded by the government, not by local rates. So they are trying to persuade the MP to take action as well here. So any examples of really strong persuasive language as well would be a good example to give for that one. And here we've got the written solution. So as we said before, you don't actually have to write too much for this, for saying it's 4 marks, as long as you do know how to answer it. So text 2 style is personal, we've got here for our first mark. Then they've given an example of that. So when they want an example, they want a quotation from the text. So I felt lucky. Showing the author's opinion. Text 3 style is formal. For example, I find myself obliged. That's an example of formal language. So we've got 4 marks there, 2 examples and 2 styles.